The way today is going to run is we have some sort of set questions that I will ask first. Then we're going to open the floor up to the audience, and then we'll move on to the next set question. What I would like to ask is any sort of audience members, and I appreciate that feels a bit strange in this environment, but if you're able to keep your videos off and your microphones off, just while the panellists are answering their questions. But if you would like to ask a question, you are more than welcome to either write it in the chat or come and join us on video and unmute your mic. The other thing just to add is that we are recording today's session. This is something that will then be shared on our YouTube and Twitter channels the third Thursday of November, which will hopefully be great. So, with no further ado, I'm going to ask all of our lovely panellists just to briefly introduce themselves, and then I'll kick us off with our first question. So, and I appreciate we haven't done an order, so I don't know who wants to start. Emily, that's alphabetical order. Let's go with that. Can I ask you to start, please?
Hiya, my name is Emily Nix and I'm from the Scottish Youth Parliament. I'm former convener of Health and Wellbeing now as of like Sunday. So I'm here as my last Health and Wellbeing convener event.
Fab, thank you. Shall we go Stef, Kirsty, Iona?
Hi there, my name is Stef Black. I'm a Senior Development Consultant with sparqs, which is Student Partnership in Quality Scotland. We're the national agency that supports student engagement and the quality of their learning and teaching experience across all of Scotland's universities and colleges.
I'm Kirsty. I am a Youth Champion Volunteer with NUS Scotland. I also am a voice of a young person who's quite new to further education. So, yeah.
Hiya, I'm Iona Sargeant and I'm an S6 pupil in Dunoon Grammar School.
That's fab. Thank you ever so much. It's just so exciting to have you all with us. So I thought we would kick it off. So really thinking that today's discussion, and we are really focusing on a discussion as opposed to a debate, we're wanting to think about what are our future student needs. So not just holding what our needs are for students right now, but what might they be next year, in 2 or 3 years. And at the end of this, I'm going to be asking you a blue sky question about, what would we want Scotland to look like in 50 years? So please don't hold back. So perhaps to begin with, bearing in mind of the current circumstances that we're working under, I wonder if you could give me some of your thoughts on what you think the long-term impact of COVID-19 might be on the support that future students will need. And I don't mind who wants to go first.
I don't mind kicking this off. So as we know, COVID's caused a lot of disruption and fear across all of generations and all society. And the way that we'll respond to that obviously will have such a huge impact on the long-term cases. Whether that's like, economical costs, financial concerns, or psychological consequences, such as your mental health. As a youth, I'd say that the pandemics obviously impacted us significantly, like all generations, but I also feel it's kind of highlighted our strong ability to kind of bounce back almost. We're quite a resilient generation, I feel. So obviously, in saying that, there will obviously still be challenges and personal circumstances to overcome with that. And obviously, there's going to be support required for it. So in terms of the support to encourage that kind of bounce back ability, I feel providing youths with the teachings and the understandings of mental health and its importance, as well as obviously the specialist intervention where required, is quite important.
Do you want to go, Emily? I think that in terms of the long-term impact that this is going to have on students, I think the first thing that as a whole sector, we just really actually need to recognise and appreciate is that going forward, there will be more students who will be requiring support for a whole variety of reasons related to this pandemic. It's brought about a significant change that's had a profound impact on students, the way that they live, the way that they study, the way they learn, the way they engage with their peers. And that will continue to have knock-on consequences for years to come in reality. And, you know, a lot of them are going to be facing challenges they previously maybe weren't, you know, around about isolation and loneliness, maybe picking up caring responsibilities that they previously wouldn't have had to have, financial instability, future uncertainty, you know, will there be jobs in the future? What will the industry look like that I was interested in going into? Is it even going to exist in 3 to 5 years' time? And therefore, I think realistically, we need to be thinking about how we can properly invest in the provision that we're going to need in the future to meet the ongoing increasing demand that I think is going to be from students and the support that they're wanting to access. And I think that we just need to be really realistic about how we prepare for that.
I think one of the other important things to recognise is obviously, like as you have both mentioned, so much instability and not really understanding what's going forward. So one of the things that maybe isn't seen as like a mental health support kind of thing is just making sure that the information is available to young people. Like students starting uni, a lot of them thought that they were going to be on campus and then they weren't, or vice versa, and it's just been really confusing. And also, as Steph mentioned, isolation's been a big issue. I think especially for some young people that have moved into accommodation, not knowing who they're going to be moving into, and maybe they just haven't clicked with the people that they're with. So maybe it needs to be something that's looked at. How can we make that better? Is there any way to make more choice in who you end up staying with? Is there a way to make contacting other people more accessible? Just sometimes it's not the mental health support, it's the things to stop the issues in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, I've moved my camera. There we go. I agree with like everyone's opinions and what everyone said, and I think it's a big thing. Like I'm still a school student, but like I couldn't imagine what it would have been like if I went to uni like a year earlier. I don't think I could have done it. I think I would have came home personally, and I think that's putting a lot of people my age off going next year. Like a lot of us are already thinking about deferring and thinking about that, and I think making it aware, like making all of us aware of what support will be available next year to us, and if uni teachers and all the staff there are as understanding as our staff have been at school, I think it'll be a really good thing for us all.
And I really appreciate actually, you know, as you're saying that, as well as sort of what support is there, what it looks like, and I suppose managing those expectations, you know, through are there changes that we can make to the flats that we might go into, or are there different support services? What does that look like? How can I access it, and how do we manage the expectations around that? I mean, I don't know, Kirsty, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I appreciate from a perspective of starting this year, and that, you know, we are living in such a period of uncertainty in terms of what we can offer, and that does change as restrictions change. I wonder if there's any learning that you might be able to share from your experience in terms of how we can communicate that, because I appreciate that that's often one of our biggest challenges. Can be getting all that information across in a way that is accessible, that does manage all of our expectations, and makes sense.
Yeah, so it's as you say, communication is obviously it's key, and kind of bouncing off of what Emily had said, early intervention to prevent, you know, challenges with your mental health developing is so important. So obviously, despite all the uncertainty and the not knowing, both as a student and, you know, with the universities not knowing themselves going on this year, there has been very difficult circumstances to try and plan and try and support and try and put in place things to make the process of going, you know, from high school into uni or whatever path you're coming from. Obviously you can't put a structured, you know, you can't have a set plan, a set support network around that when you don't know what that's going to look like, because everything at the minute's changing. The universities, I know my experience personally it's been brilliant. The university were so on top of keeping in touch with us and communicating in several different forms, to, you know, ensure that accessibility was, you know, nobody was excluded from the information. So I think from, you know, the challenges that we've been put on us this year, we've adapted really well. And although as daunting as it was, the transition's been quite okay. But I can totally understand how it can be quite discouraging for future years with all the uncertainty. But yeah.
That's brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to open the floor to see if there's any questions that anybody in the audience has burning that they'd like us to answer. Should have said before that when we're usually running sessions at Think Positive, if we don't get a response, we usually take that as a no. But I will just give you a couple of seconds in case anybody does want to ask anything. All right. We will take that as we've given lots of information and we'll continue. So our next question is thinking about, and perhaps actually possibly going back to you, Iona, first, you know, thinking about, you just said how supportive all of your staff have been at Dunoon Grammar. I wonder what we could learn from the support that is being implemented currently in, you know, both primary and secondary schools, and what I'm really aware that the support that you're offered there, those will impact massively your expectations on the support that you'll receive when you go to either college or university. And so could we have a little bit of a head start insight into what that could look like, and what's worked really well and what could we learn?
Yeah, so we've been really lucky, especially at Dunoon Grammar School, with all the support like we've been offered, and we're really grateful because just like over lockdown and like just before we went back to school, Argyll and Butte were actually one of 3 schools in Scotland that were picked to do trauma informed training for the teachers. So all our teachers have now been trained in that. So it means that they're so much more understanding of like our personal background, as well as like we have a whole other life like outside of school. And right now, especially, like that life is really, could be really affected. And it's been great. It means our teachers are so understanding. They haven't like hounded work on us. And especially like this week and like last week, I've been off self-isolating. So they've been so understanding of that. And I was panicking. I thought I was just gonna like miss 2 weeks and be so behind, but they've been so good in that. And another big thing of our mental health is we love to raise awareness in the school. We do so many different events. Like last year we done Movember and we done Walk a Mile and different things like that, and it raises such an awareness in the school. And if teachers and other pupils and all that are participating in these events, it makes people less afraid to speak up. It means they all know that we're there, everyone's there. And it's such a huge part of our school. And all 6th years this year were also given a chance to complete mentors and violence protection training, which has been really, really useful. And it's such an eye-opener. I was lucky enough that I did get to do the training, and I think there's one more part of it like coming at the end of this week. And it's been so useful, and it means we'll be able to help and teach this to younger year groups as well, which I think is really, really good. And our other key focus, which was probably the hardest this year because of Corona, was our transition. So from the primary to secondary schools. And I think this could really be implemented from like high school or whatever path to unis. And it's our transition program. So this year it was so different because normally we do like a bit more camp and it's so much harder for like little schools in the area to meet like the bigger schools, and that was one of our key areas. And so this year we've been offering peer mentoring, so it's between like a 6th year and like an S1, and it means like they all get paired up with a partner and like they can talk about any problems and anything like that. And I think it's really useful, and I would have loved to have that when I was in this one.
That's smashing. Thanks, Iona. I wonder, Emily, Stef and Kirsty, is there anything that you'd like to add, thinking about perhaps picking up that session of transitions, or Stef, not to put you on the spot, but ways in which, I know I'm going to keep saying that, but I suppose ways in which, how can we embed mental health in the curriculum? So similarly, looking at the way it's working in Dunoon Grammar, are there other ways that we can build that into colleges and universities?
Yeah, I just want to say that was brilliant to hear of all the work that's going on there, Iona, and I think it's quite inspiring to know that schools are taking this very proactive approach to offer students and teachers as many opportunities as possible to really think about their students' mental health and well-being. And I think as well, it's, you said primary and secondary school, but I'd go as far to even say nursery. My little boy is in nursery and he's 3 years old, and the nursery itself, they are so it's not just about their physical well-being, it is about their mental well-being. And I find out that he's reading books that are about resilience and about emotions and about talking about your feelings. And you think, this is a 3-year-old, that they're really wanting to encourage the fact that it's okay to feel sad sometimes and what that means, and it's okay to be angry sometimes and what that means and how you cope with that. And to think that we can do that at nursery, and that we're seeing all of these amazing things happening at primary and secondary schools, and then at 18 it just stops, or and I think there's, what expectation is that setting for students then who have been through these processes, who've transitioned and seen this support, and then all of a sudden it disappears or it doesn't look the same. What impact or what consequence does that have? And I think that there's something there, that is quite eye-opening. To touch on what you were saying there around about the transitions in the mental health and the curriculum, obviously that's a priority project for us at sparqs, is around about embedding mental health and wellbeing in the curriculum. And I think that, some of the ways that we've started to explore that is around about the kind of the support and training that is in place for staff. And that's beyond even just kind of, Scottish mental health first aid training, but that's about how do you actually develop a curriculum with students' well-being in mind? What does that look like? And I think that lends a lot of itself from universal design and learning approaches. You're making a change that is going to have a positive impact on those who need it most, but actually it's going to have a positive impact probably on every single person that you're teaching in that classroom. And I think that that's something, going forward, there's probably a lot of things that are happening in primary, secondary schools that have taken that approach to benefit all children, that we could be doing more within FE and HE.
One of the things that I've really picked up from Iona's, like talking about her school, is there's so many things that are going on, and I think that's really important, that like you realise that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, because I'm sure some of the things that worked for some people in your school maybe weren't the same things that were good for others, and it's making sure that there's that choice and availability. And also, Steph was saying about training and making sure that like people are aware of it, in the same way like if you're in a class, you maybe have to do a risk assessment for some things for your physical health. So you should be considering those same things about mental health. Is this going to negatively impact the well-being of my students or pupils? I had another point that's gone. Move on.
Yeah, I would just add to that by saying exactly what's been said. You know, the fact that it is, you know, everybody's playing their part, everybody's chipping in, and it is important. And it's so amazing to hear that, to hear exactly that, to hear that everybody's, you know, taking it on board and accepting the fact that mental health is important, that everybody has it, and that it's okay not to be okay. So just to kind of reflect and kind of touch base, at our school, I was lucky enough to participate in the SMAPA training last year. And we then took that on and we adapted it and we presented it to the rest of the school. And throughout the year, we did several other, you know, events. We did things like Time to Talk Day, and we were planning a colour fun run, like all these events just to raise awareness and really try and encourage open conversations about mental health. Because it is just so important. So my main point for that question was just to emphasize that it really should be more of a significant part of the curriculum, because it's relevant, it's real, and it's important.
And I wonder as well, actually, as you've all been chatting, there's something about this holistic approach to it. So, you know, in my notes to these questions, I've mentioned the Scottish mental health first aid training, but also the implementation of the 450 counsellors that's being pushed forward in secondary schools in Scotland, which is fantastic. And, you know, some of my background comes from Place to Be, and, you know, that idea of having a space in primary schools as well as secondary schools where it's a room that children can access support either with their peers or one-on-one, but it's a known space. There's less of that, hopefully, less of that sense of, oh, I don't know what happens to me in here, which can sometimes be a barrier when we think about, you know, if somebody was to say that they were going to access counselling or something. And I wonder, from this sort of holistic approach, is there also something that we could be thinking about as this wider sector? So not to plug Think Positive too much, but thinking about, you know, the one community approach that we're pushing forward and wanting to try and platform, thinking, you know, oh, well, if we can do one institution approaches, could we do a one Scotland approach? Because there's that blue sky thinking. Is there ways that we might want to think about making some of those bigger links? You know, Steph, thinking about your little boy getting that sort of support and input at 3, how could we make sure that that follows all the way through so that we are still learning from that? I'm aware that we've just had a question come in, which is very exciting. So Laura has asked, thinking about the community approach, does anybody have any thoughts on what we might do, or I suppose perhaps the benefits that we could share if schools are not as supportive of mental health? Is there anything that anybody would like to talk about there?
I think in some ways that does it comes back to what you were saying about having like a whole Scotland approach, and that everybody can do the same things, and that because like obviously Iona school has a lot more stuff than my school. I've considered my school to be quite good, but it still wasn't the same, and if I thought my school was good, would other schools have if they've got less? So having that same sort of structure that everybody can rely on, every like teaching staff can look at, maybe a resource that they can go to learn from. But also it's about, again, it comes back to making sure that all this information is available. I know one of the barriers to seeking support in schools for some people is not knowing what's going to happen, because a lot of people, you hear, oh, it's completely confidential, but then you've got like child protection and safeguarding, which meant it did get back to the parents, which obviously like there is barriers in place, and if something's said that needs to get back to a parent or guardian, it has to, but it needs to be laid out straight away, like you can talk to us, this is what might happen, and rather than just going straight to the parent without people's permission, talking to them and saying, right, this is what's going to happen, is there a way you'd prefer to do it, would you like to talk to them, would you like us to, that kind of thing, and making sure it's as much control and information in the individual.
So I wonder then, perhaps going back to that idea of co-producing services with young people and making sure that we're the way that we want to offer support. I was going to then try and speak on behalf of everybody that offers services, and I can't do that. But I suppose my understanding is that, you know, when we're offering support services, we're doing it to empower and to care, and to try and help. So are there ways that we can do that feel more empowering, i.e. can we learn from co-producing services, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's about making sure that there's as much choice in it as possible, because you can offer as much services as you want, but if it's not what the people that are trying to access the services want, then they're not going to come to it, they're not going to use it, or if they do, it's not going to be what they are looking for. So by co-producing it, you've got that sort of professional insight into what they know is needed, and the young person or the user's insight into, right, this is what I want from this is what would help me, and it's just makes the perfect combination.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Emily, and I think as much choice as possible is great for everyone, especially in schools and unis. And I think having different options, because I know for me personally, the first person I saw about my mental health didn't work out for me. And I think that's a real downer at the start, because you automatically think, oh, I'm never going to get better. But then I saw someone else and my whole life changed. And I think it's making that available and making people know that not everything's right for one person, but it might be right for someone else. I think that's really important.
I was just going to say, in response specifically to that question about if schools aren't supportive, I think that, Kirsty, something you said, mental health, it's relevant, it's real, and it's happening. And if they're not recognising that, and if they're not supportive about doing something about that, that's obviously that creates a big issue. And I think that's really got to come back to the strategic direction that school's having, what support and training is in place to ensure staff are actually recognising that this is a thing, and that they will have to in some capacity deal with it, whether that's through signposting or whether that's through getting the appropriate training for them to be able to put support in place. So I think that, that's a conversation that would have to be had if schools aren't recognising that this is an actual thing. That's very kind of, head in the sand approach. And that's not what pupils and our students need right now.
Yeah, exactly. In a blue sky thinking, you aim for consistency. We'd love to say that every school across Scotland and beyond have the same level of understanding and acceptance and lack of stigma associated with mental health, but we're not quite there yet. So I'd agree with Steph there in saying that if a school's not quite got the same open-minded approach that we obviously are hoping to aim for, then yeah, something needs to be said about that. But also to kind of jump off of what Emily was saying, it is, you've got to have the support in place to obviously suit the needs, and not every case is the same. One thing that I feel is really important though is the approach that the counsellors at my school took, which was resilience, not reliance. So a lot of the support obviously being there to help the individual through whatever challenges are in place, but also providing them with the skills and the confidence to then continue to, self-support themselves through it, opposed to just, relying on the counselling service to kind of bandage you up each time. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So many key phrases I want to take out of this conversation. It's great. We've been asked, actually, floating back to Steph's point, whether or not we think that there should be a legal minimum of what is taught or done The example being of Scotland making LGBTQ+ education mandatory. But I suppose the fact that there will be all sorts of pros and cons to doing that.
So I think what I would say with that, not everyone will suffer from a mental health condition, but everyone can have poor periods of mental health or mental well-being. And therefore, you know, putting something into the curriculum that addresses that or that offers a space for dialogue around that, I see that as a benefit, so that it's recognised as something that is a thing that people might experience in their life at some point. And I don't think it has to be so obvious or explicit that it's like, right, okay, today class, we're going to talk explicitly about mental health and well-being. And it's that overt. I think it's actually about the way that it's weaved through everything. It's the conscious and unconscious decisions that happen when you're building the curriculum, when you're building your assessment processes, when you're thinking about the quality processes that you have in place. What kind of questions are you asking that takes into consideration your pupils or your students' well-being? You know, thinking like a really obvious thing like assessment front loading. You know, we talk about the fact that assessments can, you get nothing and then they all come together in this big chunk, and that we know can be a really triggering experience for a lot of pupils and a lot of students, where it gives them a lot of anxiety and stress, and it's a lot to deal with. You know, so even just there being some sort of minimum requirement to take into consideration the impact that that has on students' mental health and well-being by doing assessments in such a way, I think that can be a step forward. I think it's a balance. Obviously, you know, you'll have some people who would argue against it for the fact that then we're creating problems, that we're saying to people that mental health and well-being is this thing, and then all of a sudden everyone's going to turn around and say that they've got a mental health condition or everyone's got anxiety. I really don't think that's the case. I think that we're just making sure that there is spaces for students to talk about how they're actually feeling, and that that's okay, and that, you know, it's being recognised in the curriculum that they're being taught, and that there's support and processes in place for academics and for, you know, other support service staff and professional service staff to be actively thinking about the decisions that they make and the choices that they put in place with students at the forefront of it.
I hear Stef's point about like people, like once you start talking about mental health, people sometimes use that argument of, well, people are just going to start saying I've got anxiety or I've got this. But I think actually, if it's taught well, it won't come down to that, because if it's taught in a way that like everybody's going to have ups and downs with their mental health, everybody's going to have good days and bad days, people will recognise, and it makes it easier to recognise the differences and learn from each other. And also it makes it easier for people that are struggling with a mental illness to actually recognise, right, this is a mental illness. But it keeps it open so that is less stigmatised. That's just somebody's, oh, that person's struggling a bit more than me or a bit more often than me, and making sure that it's accessible to everybody to have these conversations.
No, I really agree. I think that teaching it in schools more commonly has really helped our school, and I can really see the benefits from that, as in being a school that has taught it very well. But I understand that some schools haven't, so not everyone has the same like acceptance of it as like some of my peers do. And I'm not saying it works for absolutely everyone. There will still be some people that laugh and joke about it, but you're never going to be able to change that. But I think it's made everyone so much more understanding of what people are going through, and that exactly what Emily said, sometimes, oh, that person might have it a wee bit worse than me this week. And I think that's really important.
I wonder, so Craig has said in the comments that he totally agrees that co-production is key to ensure that services and support is accessible to both pupils and students, and that perhaps embedding co-production and peer support is a great way to positively change the culture around mental health in schools, as well as HE and FE. but it's also really important to get senior leadership buy-in. And I suppose what I was thinking as we've been chatting is about the resources and resource distribution, perhaps across the sector, where, you know, I'm really hoping that we know from the last couple of days, there is some fantastic stuff going on in Scotland. And there are some really brilliant initiatives, both at secondary school and higher and further education levels. And perhaps actually, you know, some of the conversation could then become, you know, oh my God, we all need to do more. And I wonder if there's another way to frame that actually, and is there perhaps different ways that we could learn from each other and share that learning more across, so that it isn't that we're increasing anybody's necessarily workloads or budgets or bits and pieces, but we're just sharing it across as best practice and different ways of working. I don't know how anybody feels about that. That might feel a bit too airy-fairy.
The only thing I can think to say to kind of bounce off of that, Jess, is the importance for peer-to-peer learning. It's knowing that, you know, you're more likely to listen to your pal than your teacher in some settings. So in terms of getting the information out there, just encouraging open conversations about mental health, I feel it's really important to consider peer-to-peer learning in that setting.
Just before this session, I attended the workshop with Scottish Recovery Network, all about peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer support, and the work that they're trying to do around about using peer-to-peer support for recovery. And it was interesting and insightful and fascinating. And I think the thing that really came out of that discussion was that this could be a really alternative avenue that provides the right structure and the right support for students in an HEFE setting, that at the moment isn't being recognised as such, and that we really need to actually invest in it. And we really need to actually recognise that this is something that can help students. And if we put the right resources in place, the right funding, the right structure, the right support, that will be benefiting so many people because of it. So we know that services, you know, traditional services, counselling, support services, that sort of stuff, are overstretched, you know, and you know that's you know, the statistics for that are not new, and this is potentially something that can help support that, but it can't just be informal. It can't just be off the backs of a few good people who want to help others. They need to have proper recognised support and infrastructure and investment in place, and that it's embedded and it's, you know, it's seen as this is something that can be part of our mainstream provision. And it was a really interesting session, and I think it just highlights how important that peer-to-peer support can be, that it needs to be formalised, so that, you know, everyone who's involved in it is benefiting from it, and it isn't just relying on those good souls who will, you know, want to help and support people and give up all their time to do it. You know, there needs to be other support in place and resources in place for them.
For me, I think communication is the key thing. I think whether that's from like a wider level of making sure that schools, councils and like management teams within schools or unis are talking to each other, learning from each other, sharing what they're doing, and but also smaller conversations within schools with each other. I think on the peer support thing, the Scottish Parliament's Public Petitions Committee were doing research on that last year, around this time last year actually. That was something that SYP were lucky to be involved in, and it was talking about there's pros and cons of it and the dangers of it. So like obviously you have to be making sure that whoever you're talking to has the capacity to take on how you're feeling, and also having that they know how to support you. And I think all of that comes back down to communication and learning the vocabulary, learning what resources are available. I think even picking up on something Iona said earlier about sometimes people make jokes about mental health, and sometimes that is just people either for lack of understanding and or just for the sake of being mean. They're maybe not being nice about it, but I think it's a very Gen Z thing to sort of like joke about mental health or joke about not wanting to be alive. But I think sometimes you have to actually look at that individual and talk to them and see, is this just a joke, or is this a coping mechanism? Is it a cry out for help? Because sometimes it will be and sometimes it won't be, but it's about taking that individual approach and talking to people.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Emily. Everyone's different within themselves, so everyone's approach to their mental health and how they cope with it will be really different as well. And I think communicating is the key part to understanding how it's going to work for everybody.
I just wanted to pick up as well, I think something that actually all three of you have just said is about that when it's formalised and when support structures are formalised, you're also ensuring that the person who is offering support is receiving support themselves, and how important that is. I attended the good practice in a specialist mental health mentoring session this morning, and they were saying there how important it is that you have strong supervision in these roles and that you have places that you can refer back to. Is that monthly check-ins from a peer support network, or is it that more formalised supervision provision? And there's something, again, I fully appreciate I'm harping because I'm trying to work it out in my own brain as we're having this discussion, but I think there is something in that in terms of one of the things that we've been trialling at Think Positive, which we did through COVID, was these weekly forums where we brought in different external organisations. We've had, anyone from Papyrus to Penumbra. We have Universities of Sanctuary joining us next week, just to look at the different things that are happening in the sector and where people can signpost to confidently. So for instance, we had Stephen come from Penumbra, and he talked about what would happen if you signposted somebody to use one of Penumbra's services. So you could manage those expectations, but also feel confident being able to signpost. And Papyrus offer a debrief session. So there are those things going on and services, and making sure that people do know where to access support so that they can confidently offer support themselves feels really important.
I mean, that touches on the Student Mind report that came out around about the role of the academic. And the academics had cited from that research that they felt that now coping with student mental health problems was now an inevitable part of their role, that they didn't feel supported to do it. So they had students who were coming to them and were saying, I'm really struggling, I'm suffering with a period of poor mental health or my mental health condition. And because they were their touch point, they were the person that they see most often, that was the person they felt comfortable to go to. But that academic didn't necessarily have the support behind them to feel that they could deal with that situation. I think one of the quotes in the report was that one of the academics said, that they had been disclosed some really quite, intense feelings and situation that was going on, and they themselves didn't know what to do with it, but they felt the burden to take it on because they wanted to help the student, but they weren't equipped in any way to do it. And I think that just obviously highlights the fact that if more students are going to be accessing support or needing support, that inevitably it might be these front of line people that are in the classroom that they're speaking with, and even more so because of COVID, perhaps because they're not maybe going to be aware of maybe some of the other support that's available to them. And then we're going to get these academics who don't have the right support behind them or the right training behind them taking on these difficult situations. And I think, yeah, they need to know how to signpost, but also, as you say there, Jess, like, what is it that they're actually signposting to? They're not just giving over an email address or a phone number, but they can actually talk about what that service is and what services it provides and what the student can then expect. And I think, yeah, there's still a lot of work that I think needs to be done there in making sure that the staff's well-being is also protected in this situation.
I always think of it like peeling the onion. Once you've gone back, there's the next layer of support to be offered. which hopefully actually Iona kind of tags into your idea of Dunoon Grammar School offering this as a community, and you knowing that everybody's there. So I really loved that when you said that. I thought that sounded really fabulous. I think we'd all be so lucky to be able to say that about, you know, where we're studying or where we're working. I just want to double check to see if there's any more questions from the audience. Please do keep writing them. I promise I've got my chat box open, ready to read anything out that you have. Because otherwise I'm just going to start moving us on to our last sort of pre-prepared question, which is our big blue sky thinking. And I suppose the background to this is, so through this conference, through our next steps that we're going to run next, one of the things that we're looking at is this national action plan. That could be, we really don't know what it's going to look like, because again, it's going to be something that we're hoping works for everybody. So something accessible. The only thing we've jokingly said so far is that it probably won't be a report because nobody will want to read that. But something in terms of looking at all the different frameworks, all the different initiatives, all the different services, and where do they fit? Because it's, you know, it's so clear that there's so much going on, that to be the person at either the school or the college or the university that has to make that decision of what they bring in, I don't envy that of anybody. So we'd like to come up with some sort of, I don't even want to say documentation, but something that that brings together all of those things and then is easily accessible as a reference point for people to look at and find what works for them. So it's not saying, oh, everybody's got to do this, it's this is what's available. So with that in mind, this is where your blue sky thinking comes in, because what do you think we should be aiming for? If you were to map, you know, really great mental health support, sorry, got excited and knocked something off my desk. If you were to map really great mental health support for students, particularly thinking university and colleges, but also, you know, bearing in mind what they might have had at primary school and secondary school, what would it look like? And there are no silly answers. There you go.
I'll go first. So for me, I think it would be, this is a bit of a cheat answer because there are a couple of things. So it's not just one sort of bit. A fully integrated approach to mental health and wellbeing within the curriculum would be one of them. So that would be across all sort of, you know, so learning and teaching processes, assessment and feedback, transitional support, quality arrangements, the curriculum co-design, the whole works, that it would be a fully integrated approach in how we think about mental health and well-being of our students when we are designing and delivering learning and teaching in our universities and colleges. I would like to see us move to a much more proactive rather than reactive approach to mental health and well-being, so that we're actually putting the processes in place to provide the best possible chance for our students to thrive, and not just firefighting when issues have already manifested. And I think on top of all of that, what has to be at the heart of it is students as partners. So it has to be a complete partnership approach to everything that we're doing, that students are involved as co-creators, they're involved as people to review and evaluate and think about the impact that these changes are having, that they're able to have spaces to talk about what works and what doesn't, and that they really are kind of given the space to work alongside staff and senior management and sector agencies to deliver this integrated approach to mental health and being across institutions. So that is what I'd like to see us in however many years' time.
Yeah, I completely agree with Steph. I think I really picked up on the not the reactive but the proactive approach, and I think that's what my kind of hope in my blue sky thinking was, kind of like, instead of just reacting to someone mentioning a mental health problem, to have all the help already there, to have it integrated throughout the school, the college, the uni, throughout wherever it is, the workplace in the future. Everything it has to be there. It can't just pop up whenever it wants to. You have to have all the help, everything available. I think that was a really big thing for me.
Yes, I'd agree with that. My blue sky thinking was in line with that, exactly, being like early intervention for prevention and such. I also hope for better understanding and acceptance of mental health across all societies, institutions, generations, genders, etc. Just a whole universal acceptance that it's okay to be okay, and obviously a lot of support to suit all requirements to kind of just push that message.
I really do like the proactive, not reactive approach, I think, and it needs to come under both, like, specifically mental health support, so whether that be having things like mental health check-ins or any kind of support that's already there, but also just making sure that the situations are already, like, as Steph said, the best chance. So as much information is there as possible, maybe within courses, different tutors of different subjects talking to each other and making sure that, like, oh, when are you doing this assignment, so it's not all coming to them in the same week, or making sure to limit that stress that's going on pupils. Again, with the accommodation, making sure that there's ways for people to be happy within who they're talking to, not feel so isolated, just all that kind of stuff of being prepared. But also, again, going back to what Steph said earlier about, like, child in nursery already learning, as much as it's not a uni approach, like, I think if we could get young people to learn about mental health and be accepting about mental health, we could just eliminate the stigma within that generation. Obviously that's easier said than done, but if we could get an entire generation just completely comfortable talking about mental health with no stigma, no discrimination, think about the impact that it'd have going forward for every next generation.
That's fantastic. And hey, we did say blue sky. We said it could be as big a job as we want it to be, really. That is fantastic. I'm really aware that we're sort of coming to the end of time now. So I do want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. A big thanks to our panellists. Brilliant. And a huge thank you to everybody else for chipping in and listening to our conversation and engaging with it and asking us questions. That's been fab. Does anybody have any sort of final words before I go on and chat about what happens next? Just so you know, in the chat, Shada has said, fabulous panel and great facilitation. Thank you all. There's so much to take away. And Craig has said that he agrees with you 100%. Proactive early intervention and mainstreaming mental health across institutions, including teaching, is key. But on a practical note, accessibility is also very important. Mental health doesn't stick to a 9-to-5 support needs, and it should be available at all times. And then both Emma and Lindsay have said thank you for all of your contributions and that they've been fantastic. Brilliant. All right, well, I will wrap up because I'll let you all go for your break. So we do now have a break for 15 minutes, and then we're going to bring you back for an energizer, because who doesn't love to finish a conference on an energizer? Where we'll be thinking about all of the discussions we've had so far and what we can ask of each group, be they students, student associations, institutions, mental health organisations, the NHS, the Scottish Funding Council and the Scottish Government. I've practiced saying that and it's still a mouthful. And thinking about how we support those groups to do the things that we would like them to do. So other than that, thank you very much. Please enjoy your coffees.